Most people don't realize this, but fear is not what stops them, it's what controls them. It controls the words they never speak, the chances they never take, and the life they quietly settle for. Every dream left unfinished, every opportunity missed, can usually be traced back to one silent force working behind the scenes. Fear doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as logic, caution, and waiting for the right time. And because of that, millions live their entire lives without ever challenging it. But what if fear was never your enemy, only a habit you were taught? What if the very thing you've been running from could be permanently dismantled, not with motivation, not with hype, but with understanding and control of your own mind? This message is not about temporary courage or feeling confident for a moment. It's about removing fear at its root. It's about gaining command over your thoughts, your decisions, and your actions so fear no longer has a voice in your life. If you've ever felt stuck, hesitant, or held back by something you couldn't fully explain, stay with me until the end. What you're about to hear has the power to change the way you think, the way you act, and the way you face the rest of your life. Fear is not an external force imposed on human beings by circumstances, people, or events. It is a mental creation that originates within the mind itself. What most people label as fear is actually an emotional response formed by repeated thoughts, imagined outcomes, and conditioned beliefs. The mind has the ability to accept ideas without questioning their truth. And when negative thoughts are entertained repeatedly, they gradually transform into emotional reactions that feel real and powerful. Fear feels convincing because the mind does not easily distinguish between an actual threat and an imagined one. A person can experience the same physical reactions, racing heart, hesitation, anxiety, whether the danger is real or purely mental. This is why fear often appears strongest when nothing has actually happened yet. It thrives on anticipation, projection, and assumption rather than facts. Once the mind begins to dwell on possible loss, embarrassment, or failure, it creates emotional evidence that reinforces fear, even in the absence of real danger. Over time, this mental habit becomes automatic, and the individual starts reacting to thoughts instead of reality. Fear gains authority only because it is repeatedly validated by attention. The more one thinks about what could go wrong, the more convincing fear becomes, until it feels like an unavoidable truth. In reality, fear has no substance outside of the thoughts that sustain it. Change the pattern of thinking, and the emotional response begins to change as well. When the mind is trained to question fearful thoughts rather than accept them blindly, fear loses its foundation. Awareness alone weakens fear because it exposes it as a mental construction rather than an unchangeable condition. Once a person understands that fear is created internally, they regain control over it because anything created by thought can be altered by thought. This realization shifts power back to the individual and removes fear's illusion of authority. A definite purpose gives the mind a fixed direction, and direction is the greatest enemy of fear. When a person lacks clarity about what they want, the mind wanders, and in that wandering state it becomes vulnerable to doubt, worry, and emotional confusion. Fear finds easy access to an undisciplined mind because uncertainty creates space for imagined dangers and negative expectations. Without a clear objective, the mind constantly shifts between possibilities, none of which feel secure, and this instability fuels fear. A definite purpose acts like an anchor, holding the mind steady even when circumstances are uncertain. It provides a central point of focus that organizes thoughts, emotions, and actions around a single aim. When pose is strong and emotionally charged, it commands attention and leaves little room for fear to operate. The mind cannot fully concentrate on a meaningful goal and fear at the same time. Purpose replaces hesitation with intent and transforms anxiety into controlled effort. Fear often appears when a person questions whether their actions have meaning or direction, but when purpose is clear, effort feels justified and resistance loses its power. A person driven by a definite purpose develops resilience because their attention is fixed on achievement rather than on potential loss. Even obstacles begin to lose their emotional weight, as they are viewed as temporary conditions instead of threats. Purpose also strengthens decision-making, which further weakens fear because fear thrives on delay and uncertainty. When the mind knows where it is going, decisions become easier and more decisive. This mental firmness creates emotional stability, and emotional stability prevents fear from gaining control. Over time, a clearly defined purpose conditions the mind to expect progress rather than danger, shifting the emotional response from apprehension to confidence. As purpose becomes a dominant mental habit, fear gradually fades into the background, no longer able to command attention or influence behavior. Faith is not a sudden emotional experience or a blind belief in luck. It is a mental habit developed through discipline and repeated thinking. The mind functions through patterns, and whatever thoughts are consistently repeated eventually become dominant beliefs that influence emotions and behavior. When thoughts of confidence, expectation, and inner certainty are deliberately impressed upon the mind, they begin to replace thoughts of doubt and fear. Faith grows through repetition because the subconscious accepts ideas that are continually reinforced, regardless of whether they are positive or negative. This is why fear often feels automatic. It has been practiced mentally over time. In the same way, faith can be practiced until it becomes the natural response of the mind through conscious autosuggestion. A person deliberately feeds the mind statements of belief, purpose, and confidence, training it to respond with assurance instead of hesitation. At first, this practice may feel artificial, but repetition transforms suggestion into conviction. The emotional response gradually shifts as the mind begins to expect favorable outcomes rather than failure. Faith does not ignore reality. It shapes the way reality is interpreted. A mind conditioned with faith looks for solutions instead of threats and possibilities instead of limitations. This shift in perception directly weakens fear, because fear depends on negative expectation. When expectation becomes positive, fear loses its emotional fuel. Faith also strengthens persistence, allowing a person to continue acting even when results are not immediate. Each action taken in faith reinforces the belief that effort leads to progress, further solidifying the habit. Over time, faith becomes self-sustaining as small successes validate the mental conditioning that created them. This process proves that faith is not mystical or accidental, but the result of mental discipline. Once established as a habit, faith automatically governs reactions to challenges, replacing fear with calm confidence and steady determination. Fear draws its strength from indecision and doubt because an undecided mind is an unprotected mind. When a person hesitates, weighs options endlessly, or delays commitment, the mind remains in a state of uncertainty, and uncertainty invites fear. Doubt creates unanswered questions, and those unanswered questions are quickly filled by imagined risks, negative outcomes, and self-criticism. The longer a decision is postponed, the more time fear has to grow, multiply, and present itself as reasonable caution. Indecision keeps the mind divided, and a divided mind cannot act with confidence. Fear thrives in this division because it does not need proof, only possibility. Once doubt enters, the mind begins to focus on what might go wrong instead of what can be achieved. This internal conflict drains mental energy and weakens emotional control, making fear feel overwhelming. Firm decisions, on the other hand, bring mental order. The moment a decision is made, the mind shifts from uncertainty to direction. Even if the decision is imperfect, it creates movement, and movement disrupts fear's influence. Fear loses its grip when there is no longer a debate taking place in the mind. Decision eliminates hesitation, and hesitation is fear's primary source of nourishment. A person who develops the habit of making prompt and definite decisions trains the mind to trust itself. This trust gradually replaces doubt with confidence. Fear cannot dominate a mind that has learned to decide quickly and stand by its choices. Decisiveness also strengthens self-respect because each decision reinforces the belief that one is capable of choosing and acting without approval or reassurance from others. As decisiveness becomes habitual, fear finds fewer opportunities to interfere because the mind no longer entertains endless alternatives or imagined disasters. Instead of asking what could go wrong, the mind focuses on execution and adjustment. This mental shift weakens fear at its root, proving that fear is not defeated by thinking more, but by deciding more firmly and moving forward without delay. Action is the most effective weapon against fear, because fear exists primarily in anticipation, not in experience. The mind becomes fearful when it imagines future pain, failure, or loss, but the moment action begins, imagination is replaced by engagement. Fear thrives in stillness, where thoughts have unlimited time to exaggerate risks and create negative scenarios. Inaction gives fear permission to grow unchecked, turning small doubts into overwhelming barriers. When a person takes action, even a minor step, the mind is forced to shift from speculation to execution. This shift breaks the mental cycle that feeds fear. Action introduces facts, effort, and movement, all of which weaken emotional exaggeration. The body and mind begin working together toward a task, leaving little space for fear to dominate attention. Confidence does not precede action, it is produced by it. Each act completed, regardless of size, sends a signal to the mind that progress is possible, and that signal directly contradicts fear's message of helplessness. Fear loses credibility when it is challenged by experience. Action also builds momentum, and momentum further reduces fear by creating a sense of control. The more a person acts, the less mysterious and threatening the situation becomes. What once seemed intimidating becomes familiar through direct involvement. Fear depends on the unknown, and action steadily converts the unknown into the known. Even imperfect action is more powerful than endless preparation, because it replaces emotional tension with practical adjustment. Mistakes made during action provide learning, while mistakes imagined during inaction only strengthen fear. Over time, consistent action conditions the mind to respond automatically with movement rather than hesitation when faced with uncertainty. This conditioning rewires the emotional response, making courage habitual instead of forced. Fear cannot survive where action is repeated because each step forward weakens its influence and reinforces the belief that challenges can be faced directly rather than avoided. The mind operates through conditioning, responding automatically to the thoughts, emotions, and reactions that are practiced most often. Courage, like fear, is not a trait people are born with. It is a conditioned response developed through repeated mental discipline. When the mind is left unmanaged, it defaults to emotional reactions shaped by past experiences, social influence, and habitual thinking patterns. Fear becomes the automatic response because it has been rehearsed through repetition. However, the same mental mechanism that installs fear can be used to replace it with courage. By consciously choosing thoughts of strength, control, and self-trust, a person begins to retrain the mind's habitual reactions. Emotional control plays a critical role in this process because emotions intensify whatever thoughts dominate the mind. Learning to pause, observe emotional reactions, and redirect attention prevents fear from escalating into paralysis. Repetition is essential, as the subconscious accepts ideas that are consistently reinforced through thought, emotion, and action. Each time a person responds to a challenge with deliberate calm instead of panic, the mind records a new pattern. Over time, these responses become automatic, reducing the effort required to remain composed. Mental discipline also involves eliminating negative influences that reinforce fear, such as uncontrolled environments, pessimistic conversations, and constant exposure to discouraging ideas. As the mind becomes conditioned for courage, it begins to interpret challenges as tests of strength rather than threats. This shift in perception changes emotional reactions at their source. Confidence grows not from avoiding difficulty, but from repeatedly facing it with control. The mind learns through experience that fear is not necessary for protection and that clarity produces better outcomes than panic. As courageous responses are practiced consistently, they become the default state of the mind, replacing fear with stability, self-command, and inner strength. Fear is not a permanent enemy, nor is it a force greater than your own mind. It exists only as long as you allow it to guide your thoughts, delay your decisions, and control your actions. Once you understand that fear is mentally created, weakened by purpose, replaced through disciplined faith, starved by decisiveness, and destroyed by action, its power begins to collapse. When the mind is conditioned daily to respond with courage instead of hesitation, fear loses its authority and becomes nothing more than a signal to move forward. Mastery over fear is not achieved in a single moment, but through consistent control of thought, emotion, and behavior. Those who learn this truth are no longer limited by circumstances, opinions, or imagined outcomes. They act with confidence, persist with certainty, and shape their own results through mental discipline. When fear is removed, clarity replaces confusion, confidence replaces doubt, and purposeful action replaces hesitation, opening the door to unlimited growth and achievement. Good luck on your journey toward mastery over fear. May you move forward with clarity, courage, and unwavering belief in your ability to succeed. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to invest in your own growth.